All right. This is a collection of slides I've taken probably over the past 40 to 50 years um, in Eastern Canada. And I've always had a fascination for the railroads in Eastern Canada. Um, they just really ran things the old fashioned way. So I've made numerous trips up there um, between 1970 and really the present. So what we're going to do is we're going to go from Montreal to the Atlantic Ocean on a Canadian National. And then we're going to go down the Dominion Atlantic Railway and come back on the Canadian Pacific from St. John, New Brunswick to Montreal. And then we're going to take a short shot to Ottawa from Montreal and back and end the show. So that was the best way I could figure to do this. So we'll see how it goes here. And I welcome all of you from the Wisconsin Chapter NRHS to this program. One of the nice things about doing this Zoom thing is you can share it with other people. And I thank Mike Uhas for his invitation. I notice I have some Philadelphia spies here, which is fine by me. And I see Tony White's there, so I know he's spying on me. But I'm happy to be here with you, and let's give it a whirl. Well, it used to be we got to get out, was an easy overnight trip to Montreal on the Montrealer. From Washington to Montreal, you could leave after dinner in places like Washington, Philadelphia, New York, and be in Montreal the next morning at 10 o'clock. So you lost no time. And there's a couple of views going up on the central Vermont, and a stop at St. Lambert, and then across the long Victoria Bridge into downtown Montreal. And I had a friendly crew with me. They let me hang out in the baggage dorm for a while until the customs guys came along, and they got a little antsy, but that's all right. And there's a train winding its way into Central Station in downtown Montreal. 2 units. That car that you see in the bottom part of this view is an ex-Chesapeake and Ohio car, the 8302, and they fixed that all up with a piano and a bar and all that kind of thing. And if you rode the train, it would be a rolling party all night. But it's a good way to get to Montreal. Unfortunately, we can't do it today. Canadian National wanted to slap something like a 26 million dollar annual charge to handle the train in Central Station in Montreal, and Amtrak wouldn't go for it, so they terminated it at St. Albans, Vermont. And then you rode a Vermont bus, or Vermont, not Trailways at that point, it was just Vermont Transit, the rest of the way to Montreal. And that didn't last for too long, and that was cut out. So that was the good way to get there. One place to stay in downtown Montreal was 2 doors from Windsor Station, and across a park from Central Station. It was the Sheraton Laurentian Hotel, and the rates were right. It was a nice hotel, and was built in 1948. Had 1,000 rooms. And like I said, it was $22 a night, and they tore it down. So now you have to go over to the Queen Elizabeth, and that'll cost you quite a bit more. And just ads, the Bud Company was a good advertiser in magazines like National Geographic, and you will see an ad on the left for the RDC, and then on the right for the Canadian. And the CP was a big bud customer. Now, some of them were built under license in Canada and not built down here in Philadelphia at the Red Lion plant, which is only about a mile and a half from my home here. So, and then the CN preferred Pullman Standard in most of their equipment. But the Bud equipment, as you know, for the most part, has outlasted the Pullman Standard equipment because it was stainless steel. Well, this is a couple postcard views of Central Station, the CN station in Montreal. You can't take this photo today because the Queen Elizabeth Hotel is in front of this, as well as the CN headquarters building. And so you'll see an FP9. I'm waiting for a photo to come back from the lab, which has a steam excursion departing from Central Station, and that will go in one of these spots. Nice thing about PowerPoint is you can edit it all the time. I mean, it's really just a visual version of Microsoft Word, and very easy to use. Well, many people went to Montreal to see the famous antique electrics up there, which ran till they were like 75 years old on the suburban electric line. One of the slowest operations you will ever see or ever ride. So, but we enjoyed it while it lasted. And FPA hanging out on the end of the platform there at Central Station in September 1976. And the turbos. Everybody remembers the famous turbos. They, a couple of them caught fire and burned up. But there it is in 1974 in the CN paint scheme at Dorval. And then the second photo is a little bit out of where we're going at Brockville, Ontario in the Via paint scheme. So, but they ran, and but they did have their headaches, to be sure. And there's a pair of the box cabs at Mount Royal Station, deadheading out to pick up a train. There's a close-up look at one of the, these were built between 1914 and 1917. And yet here's a view taken in 1974, and they're still active. So they were always interesting to look at. They always ran in pairs, or virtually always ran in pairs. And they just kind of ground along, and the speed limit on the trains wasn't very fast, probably no faster than 25, if that. But everybody made a trip to Montreal, went out to the De Montagne line to get a look at the electrics. They also had 3 GE center cabs, which you see on the picture on the left. These dated to 1950. They weren't all that awfully old, but they bought them, and I don't know that I ever rode behind them, but I certainly rode behind the box cabs. And here are the MU cars, and these were doggedly slow too, and no wonder. They came with 1 motor car and 2 trailers. I don't know anywhere else that was really done, but all this equipment's been retired. A lot of these cars have wound up on tourist roads because they weren't, they weren't that old. They were only built around 1950. But this line has been tremendously upgraded. You'll see a shot at the end. And now it's being changed all around and becoming a light rail line. So a lot of money was spent just to upgrade the line, and then they're going to do another upgrade. And there's a 5-car set. So obviously there's 2 motors in there, but obviously a trailer's missing somewhere. And a 3, this is normal to see a 3-car set in most service. This is out at Mount Royal Station. June 12th, 1984. And there's the center cabs at Val Royal. This was a place they could turn a train around or run around it, either one. And there was one diesel train on the line. It ran 53 miles each way between Montreal and Grenville. One round trip a day. Saturdays it ran like at noontime, because that's when a lot of the people up there, typical European style, worked a half a day on Saturday. And there are the new cars they bought. They were built by Bombardier. They're actually very nice cars inside. And yet basically these are going to be out of service too. But you can see the new catenary that was put up. New platforms were put in. This view was taken like in 2003. They still, but their top speed, brand new cars like this, top speed was, they had governors on them, 60 miles an hour. That was it. Well, there's plenty of places around Montreal to watch trains. This is the CN main line at the end of the West Island from Dorval. And the Canadian Pacific and the Canadian National main lines both parallel each other. And there are some spots there on the highway where you can just kind of pull off and duck your car into a little parking space. The CN bridge is right behind the two CN locomotives. So you could sit there all day and get good shots of all these trains. Well, we're going to travel east from Montreal. One of my first places I stopped was in Drummondville, because I thought I would see a variety of trains. And yeah, well, I did the one day I was there. A westbound train from Quebec City to Montreal had an LRC set on it, but yet an eastbound set to Montreal had an FP9 and standard coaches. And the view on the lower right is the ocean coming through with an FPA setup. Well, I decided to chase some of these trains back and forth to Halifax. This is Bathurst. The FP9 on the top photo is on the Scotian. That was the secondary train between Montreal and Halifax. The ocean, of course, was the primary train. And of course, there were plenty of MLW. For anybody that liked the sound of Alcos, there were plenty of MLW units on the freight trains in this area between Montreal and Halifax. So it was worth going up there and following the trains all the way through the province. Well, fortunately, I feel very happy that I did this. A buddy of mine who worked with me at SEPTA in Philadelphia, we were just talking about stuff, and I said, well, you want to go ride the Chaleur out to the Gaspé, we better get going because it's not going to last very long. And sure enough, not too long after this, all the paper mills on this line had shut down. And so there was no justification for the line. The track was in terrible condition. The bridges were in worse condition. And so they just shut it down. It still hasn't started back up almost 10 years later. When will it start up again? Well, I can't tell that, but some of those mills, paper mills, are starting up again. So maybe there's hope in the future. Real nice little train. And that's the station at Gaspé at the end of the line. And there's a shot in October 2001 with the Chaleur there. And there was full food service on the train. There was a dome. It was one of the Skyline domes where the kitchen and dining facilities were actually underneath the dome. And although this car seems to have a full diner, there were a couple sleepers and a couple coaches. Anything you could want. A really nice ride too. and it ran in the winter as well. And don't murder my French if I think that's pronounced Paspiviac. And before the F-40s and the head-end power came along, March 1989. And then the F-40s and the head-end power came along, and this is Chandler, Quebec, in August of 2014. Well, for those of us from Philadelphia, this has a very, very sweet connection to us. That is the former Reading Railroad Crusader, built in 1937 to run between Philadelphia and Jersey City, New Jersey. Okay. In 1962, the Crusader equipment was sold to Canadian National, and they instituted the Champlain, running the fastest train between Montreal and Quebec City. My wife and I did have a chance to ride on it, and enjoyed the equipment very much. So I'm thankful I got to ride it now, because most of these cars are in museums now. And somewhere in here, I had hoped that you might see, you will, I think. And this is two trains at Saint Foy, a train between Montreal and Quebec, and then another train that came from up in the North Country a little bit. And they would put them together back to back. I mean, that's something they do up there. 1989. Well, there's the famous terminal at Quebec City, with that great architecture, really kind of influenced by Canadian Pacific. The Bud RDC down on the left there was going to go on a schedule to go from Quebec to Richmond to Sherbrooke to Montreal. And there is an old postcard view of the Quebec station and the Crusader equipment coming into Montreal. Like I said, my wife and I rode this train on a round trip one day to Quebec City from Montreal, just to ride in the Crusader equipment. And that's the train we rode. Not a bad way to go, right? And there's what the CN did with the Crusader cars inside. One of the observation cars, observation bar, a full dining car, lounge and snack car, and a coach observation on the other end. And unfortunately, it has now been completely retired. Move up the line a little bit to Moncton, New Brunswick. That's not what the station at Moncton looks like today, that's for sure. It's a very modern building there. 3 Montreal Locomotive Works switchers, switching the yard at Moncton, and a bunch of Bud cars gathering to swap passengers with each other. In 1989, this service still was running. It was a Bud RDC that ran between Sherbrooke, Quebec, and Central Station in Montreal. So some bit of this existed, pardon me, and what you need to realize that most of this service was discontinued in 1990 when the massive cutbacks hit via. Well, you never know what you'll find anywhere on a railroad, but here in Rothsay, New Brunswick, in 1973 is a wigwag signal. Boy, there aren't many of these left in the world. Just not far from St. John, New Brunswick. And the Bud car there was rolling along between Moncton and St. John. also at 73. And this was a Bud car set that ran from Edmonton to Brunswick to Moncton. And I drove all the way across New province of New Brunswick one morning back in 76 just to get this shot. Well, I got there in time, about 10 minutes to spare. And then there's a more modern day freight on the same line. A lot of picturesque lines up here, a lot of water. And there's the Ocean, the premier train, 20 years apart. That's the same train at Amherst, Nova Scotia, with the FPAs in 1976 and F40s in 1996. Notice the station's been fixed up. And as the Ocean was pulling out westbound, here comes a freight charging eastbound with 4 big of the MLW units on the front of it. A lot of train traffic on this line. A lot of it going to Halifax for export. And there's another version of the Ocean, taken in 1984. Seen here near Truro, Nova Scotia. And that was where all the lines came down from up around Sydney and so forth. Passenger service there is all gone. The only trains left here is the Ocean. And at Truro, there's a pair of the Bud cars from Sydney. And the Bud cars are swap passengers with the westbound Ocean. And then the Buds would go on, continue on in to Halifax. And there's a couple of views up at Sydney and North Sydney, just Bud cars. If you're like me and you like Bud cars, this was a place to be. And there's the CN station at Halifax on the right, and the Hotel Nova Scotian, which was owned by, at that point, by Canadian National Hotels, on the left. Very convenient to go there, stay in the hotel for a night, and come down in the morning to the platform and get on your train. Well, this railroad isn't here anymore. It was a piece of the Canadian Pacific. Dominion Atlantic ran from Halifax down to Yarmouth, Nova Scotia. Generally had one Bud car round trip a day, but you could change at Digby, Nova Scotia, the 2 Bud cars one in each direction. They met at Digby, and you could go get on the Canadian Pacific ships to go across the Bay of Fundy to get to St. John, New Brunswick. Notice in the timetable there from 1960 that they've actually, and these 2 Bud cars, 90, 58, 59, were lettered Dominion Atlantic and not Canadian Pacific. That's a fair shot of a steam train leaving Halifax for Yarmouth back in 1955. And there's a map of the Dominion Atlantic. That's pretty. You can see where the dotted line coming across the Bay of Fundy from St. John. That's what the Princess of Acadia would come across the bay, and you would connect there. Yarmouth's down at the end of the line, or you could go back up to Halifax. This is gone today. This is absolutely all gone. Waybill, lettered Dominion Atlantic. They had a lot of pride on the Dominion Atlantic. They were very individualized. And that's the Dominion Atlantic at Windsor in 1989 with a Via Bud car en route from Yarmouth to Halifax. And basically, I think the railroad from beyond here, beyond Windsor, is abandoned. Well, down along the run at Grand Pré is the statue of Evangelina Memorial Church. On the right is a commemorative book issued by the Dominion Atlantic Railway in 1947. It was a 67-page book on the history, and I have one of a couple different versions. And but I remember the engineer on the Bud car. The day Marie and I were riding down to Yarmouth, I asked him if I could lean over. I was up front with him, and I asked him if I could lean over behind him and take a picture of the statue. Oh no, he says, I'm not going to let you do that. He says, we're going to stop the Bud car and you can get off and take your picture, and which was really kind of pretty neat. That's the way they were, personalized people. And there's the famous old headquarters at Kentville, Nova Scotia. Sadly, this building was demolished in 1990. Huge old rambling wooden building. They had me visit them there, and they actually stopped working the morning I showed up to sit down and have coffee and donuts. I thought it was awful nice of them. That business car down at the bottom, it's business car Nova Scotia. It is still in existence today at the Toronto Railway Museum in Ontario. And just a typical steamer, but with the DAR logo on the tender. And some more views. Wasn't much traffic on the Dominion Atlantic this time. And you see the yard there at Kentville, which was the headquarters. By this time, there weren't many outfits producing anything down there. There was a potato chip factory, I think, along the line, and they were getting inbound loads of oil and vegetable oil and so forth. There used to be quite an apple business down there along the shore of the Bay of Fundy, but wasn't much to keep this line going. And little humor by Via in their timetables: take it easy, take the train. There's the famous Bear River Bridge, and you can see its predecessor in a postcard that crossed the Bear River near Digby, Nova Scotia. And I went out there and I waited for the Bud car to come along. Of course, he came along right on time, but this bridge was torn down in sometime, I guess around 2012. They actually tore the whole bridge down. There's no railroad here anymore. And there is the ship. The lower right is the Princess of Acadia, and the one on the right is the Princess of Acadia. Its predecessor is the Princess Helene, and they plied the waters of the Bay of Fundy between St. John, New Brunswick, and Digby, Nova Scotia. We took two trips to Eastern Canada, and on the one we actually took our car and sailed on the Princess of Acadia with our car from New Brunswick, St. John, over to Digby, and we stayed overnight in Yarmouth. And there's used to be at one point the train actually went out on the pier in the middle left of the slide there. That's where the depot was in Digby, and the train would wind its way down around the curve and out onto the pier and transfer passengers right on the pier. And that's the station at Yarmouth. Very, very nice building. I was able to find a postcard out on eBay of it. So we went back across the river because we're going in the reverse order of the trip we made. And you'll see a CP business car there, ready for its next trip in 1976, parked at St. John. Now, the Atlantic Limited ran to St. John from Montreal at this time. And then it was rerouted a couple times, and they moved to St. John Station. They used the old CP station, and this is where the CN station was. They're in different parts of St. John. And there's the Atlantic when the CP ran it at St. John on the outskirts of town. Neat little streamliner, overnight streamliner, and with an E8, a baggage car, a coach, a dome, one of the dome cars that had the kitchen and dining area underneath, and a sleeper. Real nice pocket, West pocket streamliner. Went through Maine in the middle of the night. And then via rerouted the other Atlantic via St. John, and this is at McAdam, New Brunswick. All right, we're going to move now to Montreal. Get a few glimpses of the CP commuter line. This is Windsor Station. It's been rearranged several times and things like that. There's now a big basketball arena sits on top of the station, the hockey arena. But this was before all that was built. This was in June of '76. The big modern building right straight back is the Chateau Champlain Hotel, which was a Canadian Pacific hotel. And you'll see the CN on the office headquarters to the left there in the rear. And there's some of the trains you could see at Windsor Station in Montreal. You could see that's the Canadian on the left, believe it or not. Just a couple F units on this day and a rather short consist. But understand that when this train got into Ontario, it met up with the Toronto section of the Canadian. Of course, that doesn't happen anymore. The Canadian now is a a Toronto to Vancouver train. And it's just being here in December next week. I think the Canadian is going to come back. It's going to run once a week from Toronto to Vancouver. You wanted to have a train with a lot of good service on it. That was the way to go across. And there's the Atlantic in the bottom picture, getting ready for its trip to St. John. And in the upper right-hand corner, those gallery cars that the CP had, there were 9 of them. They had their own generators in each car, so they could put a freight unit on it, which they do here. Pardon me. And Westmount was where the passenger car yards and shops and so forth for the passenger trains were. You see a CN business car there. I don't believe Westmount Station's there anymore. I think it was torn down, and so it's been made over into one of the metro stations. And one of the 50-year-old view from April 1970, showing CPE8 number 1802 at Westmount. And that's the Glen Yard, the passenger facility on the left. Canadian Pacific had 3 EMD E8s manufactured in the United States, not built by GMD of Canada, but by EMD at LaGrange. And they were part of a motive power pool with a Boston and Maine on the Alouette between Montreal and Boston. And in the earlier years, this is 1979, standard commuter train consists on what they called the Lakeshore line here would be one FP7 and a bunch of those lightweight coaches that you see behind it. Some of these trains would run up to 9 or 10 cars with just one FP7 on. There were 40 of these cars made. I took a trip out one day on them, and the seating inside the cars was nothing much better than school bus seats. That's what they were. And but the service ran. It was reliable, and it was functional. And like I said, there were 40 of these cars, so they had plenty of capacity. And beautiful. In fact, this is going to be one of my Christmas cards this year. Just the station at Montreal West. My wife says to me, "Well, there's no train in there in the picture. You need one with a train in the picture." I said, "Well, you can see the smoke from the train up there in the sky." So I said, "There's been a train that was just here, but it just looks typically winter, particularly in Canada." And the station at Dorval, which is right near the airport in Montreal, that station is gone. It burned. And Dorval station's actually been moved kind of across a highway there. So it's kind of more accessible to the Via station, which is right across the tracks. Well, I admitted on here that I was a Bud car fan, and this train ran every day. It had 10 Bud RDCs on it. It was a regular commuter run out of Windsor Station. And the CP station again was right beside the CN. So good place to watch trains all the way from here, several miles out, because there were freight trains on both railroads, passenger trains on both railroads. It was a busy area. Well, a little further out on the line at one of the suburban stations, St. Anne de Bellevue, is the stock consist, as I call it, of the Canadian. It generally had this consist. It had a baggage dorm, a coach, a dome, a diner, a sleeper, and a dome sleeper. 2,880 miles to Vancouver. And the gallery cars, yeah, they get out on midday suburban run. I like the caricature of the commuters on the 1975 timetable. This is a place called Hudson, and they did run a middle of the day train out there in 1974. So in case people were thinking about sneaking out of work. And this is on the CN main line going towards Toronto. This is at Coteau, which is the junction point. The tracks in the foreground on the left, they're going to go to the line to Ottawa. And that's the way the passenger trains to Ottawa go. I came out here and hung out here one day at, it was pretty busy location. Well, this is Ottawa. That's Union Station in Ottawa with a commercial postcard with a CN and a CP cab unit both posed for the photographer. So that was kind of neat. And there is the standard Canadian again. You can see it. Not too many people probably were riding, but it was a train the CP kept dressed up and kept nice and clean. And then Via came along with the LRCs. I don't know how old this photo is because I did not take it. A friend of mine took it. but typical LRC consists of one locomotive and 3 cars. Amazingly, these locomotives are all gone. They were really kind of neat to ride behind. Of course, the cars tilted. And a standard consist, the Rideau leaving Ottawa for Toronto. We'll get down through Smith Falls and Brockville, 1992. Well, there was another line from Ottawa to Montreal. It was called the North Shore Line. And at this station here, there was one Bud car round trip a day on this line from Ottawa to Montreal. This is a station called Montebello, and you'll notice a log cabin station because there was a Canadian Pacific hotel here called the Chateau Montebello. And it was also a log style hotel. I believe the hotel's still open today, but don't know whether this is still here or not. And a station here was La Chute, about halfway along the line. They would take about a 10-minute break here with the Bud car. And the conductor, he would get off and he'd go to a local grocery and buy anybody snacks who wanted them. So kind of a nice personal touch. And station at Saint Therese in 1979, freshly painted. Now today, commuter service has been extended from Windsor Station out here to this point. It's actually a commuter stop now. A lot of the railroad beyond here is not there anymore. And then they decided, well, we're gonna jazz things up a little bit. So they, when the commuter authority took over, they changed the paint scheme. You can see the gallery cars there, and then down below, a set of the old coaches that had the school bus seats in them. They were still using them. And then they have this stuff. AMT does. 2013. With some Bombardier gallery cars and one of these monstrous ALP 45 DP diesels. NJ Transit has these too. They're the other outfit that has them. And but I guess they run pretty well.
Hey, Larry, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Why do you suppose they have so many horns on that?
That's a good question. When somebody was looking at this slide when I was putting this together, they said, what in the devil? So I'll have to go to one of my Canadian friends and say, okay. And I have the address for this guy who took this, Pierre Ozarek. I'll ask him, Pierre, why are there, really, it looks like 2 sets of horns.
I wonder if it has to do with weather conditions in the wintertime, because I want to make sure they, obviously being in a commuter situation, that whoever it is going to hear them coming.
Good thought. Real good thought. Okay. I'll check into that. I will. I think it's an interesting point. And I don't know whether the NJT units have that many horns on them or not. Well, you could go on the Montrealer to Montreal until 1995. It's taken off. But you could also go another way. And that's on the Delaware and Hudson. And you'll see 2 views of the D&H's train at Windsor Station. They ran down the D&H through New York. And of course, a lot of money was put into this equipment. That diner that's behind the PA was extensively rebuilt. And like I say, New York State put a lot of money into the Adirondack. So, of course, neither one of them are running now because of COVID-19. Well, and we're going to come to the end of the show here because when the PAs went and so forth, then in came, before the Amfleet cars, then came the turbos. And these were, I never rode in one of these, unfortunately, but you can see one at Westmount, Quebec, right where the big passenger yard is. And the other is at the famous Custom House and D&H station on the border at Lacolle, Quebec from 1977. And I was very happy. It was a rainy day, but I got over there and got the shot anyway. So very happy. And with that, we say au revoir. And I thank you very much for listening. So I hope you enjoyed it.
Well, thank you, Larry.